So last week we talked about the medieval times, which was also called the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages. And we talked about how life was really, really hard during those times. There was no heat, there was no running water, there was no electricity. People were very poor. The only people who had money were the people who were the royalty. One of the biggest changes from the medieval times to the Renaissance was the way that people thought about things. And in the medieval times, people just thought that's the way it is. Life is supposed to be hard. And they grew up thinking that life was just supposed to be hard work, and so they didn't expect anything else. But around the year 1300, there were some people in Italy who started to think a little bit differently. And this new way of thinking was called humanism. So now people thought, you know what? Life is not supposed to be hard. I can enjoy things and I can have comforts. And they started to think, you know what? I should be educated. I should learn things. And art and music and science can make my life better. So one of the biggest changes in this time was the way that people thought that life was supposed to be. So as the thinking changed, the way of life changed. So now people started to enjoy more things, nicer clothes, better food. They enjoyed music and dancing and art. People were not just stuck being farmers anymore, and so it was no longer only the really, really wealthy people and the really, really poor people. Now there were a lot of people who were in the middle. And yes, their life was still hard and they had to work, and there was still no lights and no heat and no running water, and homes were still dark and cold and smelly because no toilets. But people were starting to enjoy things and be a little bit happier. So just some fun things to think about. They ate food with their hands, and forks were starting to be used, but they were really only being used by people with a lot of money. Clothing was a way that they could express themselves, but it was also a way that you knew who had money and who didn't. There were rules set in place that people who had money were allowed to wear certain fabrics and certain colors, and people who didn't have money were only allowed to wear certain colors and certain fabrics. And at this time there was festivals, there were sporting events with jousting and horse riding. People played games like chess and checkers and backgammon. They would have big parties and dress up in costume. They would go to the market to go shopping. And another big change at this time was how children were treated. So in the medieval times, children were treated like small adults. They were supposed to act like adults, talk like adults, and dress like adults. They started working when they were really, really young to help their family. And children were not hugged or comforted when they were sad. They were supposed to be adults and just do what they had to do. But during the Renaissance time period, people began to treat children differently. They gave them more love, and they had free time to play and to enjoy their childhood. Education was not a normal thing. School was really only for people who were wealthy, and so a lot of people were still uneducated. And that's what life was like during the Renaissance times.